We're all good, yeah. Thanks for tuning in online, guys, and welcome to MMS Sessions number 5 here at Manchester Media School. Very pleased to have with us Bonar Bradberry, part of PBR Streetgang, here for you tonight. If you do, or if you're watching online, and you want to get involved in terms of questions, you can basically tweet us at Media School and hashtag MMS Sessions, or if you go to our Facebook, we've got a pinned sort of post at the top. You can just add in the comments there. But yeah, thanks very much for tuning in online, and I'll hand it over to you, Bonar. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for having me, and thanks for everyone for making the effort to come out on a Monday afternoon. I'm sure you might have better things to do in the sunshine, but yeah, so I suppose we'll kick off from the beginning. I began my sort of journey in all of this as a DJ, like a lot of sort of producers of the kind of music I make tend to do. I don't really have any musical training or kind of background in that, you know, like a family where people, you know, played lots of musical instruments or picked it up or anything. It was purely being a record collector and being a bit of a record nerd. And then that became DJing. And then to kind of further my sort of path into it, I decided I was going to get into promoting, because I thought that would be one way that I could either put on my own nights and then I'd be able to actually DJ at them. And then sort of that developed into promoting nights for other clubs and for other, you know, other people. And then slowly all the time I was kind of very interested in like music production and just generally like the technology behind it and stuff. And that just, it was very much a natural progression really. It took quite a few years, and you know, you'd start off, I'd just buy a sampler or something that to play with my DJ setup. But it wasn't until about 2005 that I actually started to try and properly make music on its own, as opposed to just trying to put little samples over like a DJ set or whatever. And I started out life in Birmingham, and then about 2002, 2003, moved to Leeds, and began sort of DJing up there, and got involved with a different bunch of people up there, which was great, and just a change of scenery really sort of opened me up to a lot of things, working in a record store when I moved up there. I was also at university as well at the same time, and also, you know, DJing, and that really sort of, yeah, changed things for me a bit, and sort of changed my perspective on how I was, you know, how I approached DJing, and made me want to take sort of actually production and making my own music more seriously. So yeah, that was really kind of my background, and then it just a lot of it after that is really self-taught, and just sort of I was picking up things from other, you know, friends around me that were already actually doing music courses or musicians, or you know, and they were kind enough to kind of give me time in their studios, and I'd come in and sort of try my ideas out with them. But I knew I was kind of on borrowed time with that. You know, you couldn't always just kind of keep turning up and asking, you know, oh, can I come and do this, and sort of take up 4 hours of somebody's day. So there always comes a point where you have to try and sort of do a bit of it yourself. And so it's just very much sort of trial and error, and doing things and learning, you know, kind of the wrong way to do it until you get it right, which I'm a big advocate of, but it's a very slow process. Yeah, so I suppose I'd, at any point, by the way, if people are more interested about kind of the DJing side of things, or the, you know, the part of my career where I've worked in record labels as well, or worked at 2020 Vision as a remix manager or agent. By all means, like, if you want to know about stuff like that rather than just the production side of things, by all means, just stick your hand up, and you know, we can talk about that a bit more in depth. And yeah, so I sort of, Leeds was kind of a big change for me really. As I say, I sort of started up there, and I got a job at a record shop, which, you know, turned me onto a lot of different kinds of music, and just sort of, you know, broadened my horizons, and just the friends I met there at the record shop. It was you know, the time, I think you still get it down in London and maybe a few places here like Piccadilly and other places where you have, it becomes a bit of a cult, you know, like a social hub. You know, people come in and hang out on a Saturday, and you end up meeting loads more people than you would ever normally, just, you know, kind of making music in your bedroom on your own. And so that turned me on to meeting lots more people, and just, you know, making friends, and that's how I kind of got to know people in Leeds and, you know, sort of progressed, I guess. And then at the time while I was at Leeds, I was also at uni doing a totally unrelated course, doing fashion and textiles, which you probably wouldn't believe by the state of my dress. But yeah, so I was coming towards the end of that, and I used to be resident with my friend Tom, who I do PBR Streetgang with, at Asylum, which used to be at the Mint Club at the time. And one of the other residents, Andy Whitaker, was the label manager at 2020 Vision. And he's now the label manager for R&S Records, if anyone's interested. But anyway, very talented guy, you know, really, really great at his job. But anyway, he could sort of see that I was finishing the end of my uni course and probably didn't want to go into doing, you know, fashion administration or, you know, retail management, and kind of offered me this post, basically looking after artists' remix diaries. And, you know, outside of really big artists, there's kind of, or, you know, kind of, now it's you know, the market or the landscape's changed quite a lot. But at the time, it was either to just kind of connect people who are, you know, sort of inherently quite shy and quite introverted into making connections with other labels, or, you know, making, say, other labels of a similar kind of size aware of, you know, other producers they might not have thought of, you know, working with, and just trying to strike up relationships there. But also trying to use some of the, you know, people that we really believed in, our artists at the label, to try and get them remix work with sort of majors where there's actually kind of a bit more budget, where people can actually be paid properly to, you know, spend the time and do good work, and you know, be paid for it. And also just it's a bit of a profile thing, isn't it, as well? You know, if you're remixing like a bigger artist, it's going to help, you know, project your career a bit further. So I was involved doing that for quite a number of years, really. But that also kind of gave me a really good insight into how sort of small independent labels run, and, you know, and what also kind of from an A&R point of view people are kind of looking for, and not necessarily in terms of sound, but just generally like the kind of attitude you need to have to if you want to kind of make a career out of, you know, being a working producer and artist, and, you know, sort of the attributes you need, you know, to be sort of pretty consistent and pretty reliable, and you know, and also original as well. Of course, it's not just about, you know, churning it out, but just being able to, you know, to deliver when you say you're going to deliver really helps. But yeah, all the time I was doing that, I was learning how to make music myself, and I really got into Ableton quite early on, I suppose, like version 2 or 3. I went to I think it was like the Tribal Gathering Warehouse party in 2000, I can't remember when it was, but it was like when before they started doing the you know, the really big way before the Warehouse project. And I saw a guy called Gerald just turn up with a tiny little Mac on like a little lectern, like plexiglass thing, completely see-through, and there was no controllers, nothing, and he was just bobbing away to this, and the music was going faster and slower and changing, and just going off in different directions, but all the time kind of having this running theme of Voodoo Ray, and it just totally blew my head. And so I went back to the record shop I was working at the time, and was talking to a guy who is now I don't know if anybody knows the Dead Rose Music Company, but he was like, oh yeah, it's this thing called Ableton, you know, you should try and find out more about it. And he was like, I'll help you. And yeah, and then I had another friend, basically after about 6 months, march me down to a you know, like a sound store and go and buy a copy of Ableton and like a MIDI keyboard. I was like, right, go on, just, you know, spend your student loan on that. And I was like, right, well, that's it now. I've got to do something with it. And sort of started there. And, you know, it was just, yeah, basically friends sort of teach me how to like warp up tracks, and, you know, you do loads of it wrong for ages and ages. But that's why places like this are great. You know, it's always good to ask for help. That's the one thing I would say, is because I've spent years being far too shy to go, oh, can I, you know, how about this, or what about that? And you just get stuck. And it's great, you know, you eventually do work a lot of it out, but it'll take you 4 times as long. You know, that's what's great about places like this. I wish I'd kind of done a little bit of it myself. Probably would have sped my learning curve up quite a bit. So yeah, I suppose we should get around to the meat of what we're here about, the track, really. I've decided to sort of show you a remix I've done, because it's probably the most recent thing that was released at the start of the year. It was part of a series of remixes for a label that I've been signed to for a few years called Needwant. And it was basically a part of a 5-year kind of, I suppose, celebration, or it was just marking the occasion of 5 years of them releasing records, which I've been lucky enough to sort of be around from the start. And some of the different artists on the label, kind of, we all sort of remixed each other's work, not kind of necessarily swap, but I chose to do Ejeka. I don't know if you might be familiar with him. Really talented guy called Gary from Northern Ireland, and I really liked a track of his called Forest. Actually, I got kind of a nice sort of things to pick from, but that's something I should probably mention as well, is that I tend to, and also when me and Tom were working together with remixes as PBR, I have to kind of really like something about the track before. I mean, some people are quite happy to, and I'm sure, I've never been in that situation where someone throws you like a ton of cash and goes, right, do this, I need it in 2 weeks. And you just take it because you need the money or whatever. But I always have to like something about it. There has to be an integral part of some part of that track that you take on, even if it's just 2 seconds, or else it ends up being, for me, you end up just making your own track and you're just shoehorning things in, and then kind of, I don't see the point. But other people, there is another argument to, if you're doing a remix and you're putting your sound, or almost it's an opportunity for you to release another record. But I just think it's a bit of a waste of your own efforts when you could just make your own track and release it yourself. But anyway, so that's why I kind of chose this track, because it's probably best if I actually just play you the original and you can see what I mean. And I'll sort of explain a bit further. I know, do we have to? Yeah, so I can play it to you guys now. Okay, so where are we? Let's turn the volume up a little bit. Whoa, yeah. I won't play like the whole thing, we'll go through but just so you get a kind of feel of it.
Obviously, this is Ejeka's Forest, which we can't play too much of just because we're streaming on YouTube. But for the copyright stuff, although I'm sure he wouldn't mind, but YouTube might get cross. Yeah. What is it you like about this track, Bonar? What's standing out?
The thing that I really like now is, if you can hear in the breakdown now, is this sort of huge kind of Jupiter sounding thing that's just opening up and expanding. It's just, I'm a big nerd for like 80s sort of sounding synths, and that is mega. It's like, in the way it just he's opening up the filters and it's just getting bigger and bigger, and it's like a proper room filling sound. And the rhythm of it is not exactly like a straight 4/4, but he's. So yeah, that was really the thing that I liked. Oh, that's kind of odd. There we go. Yeah. So that's the thing that I really liked about it the most. And so what I wanted to do was take that and put it kind of in the context of sort of the sound of the music that I make, really.
You got any questions at this point? We all good? Yeah.
You mentioned that it's obviously really important to get tracks out and remixes in order to sort of progress. But then also you said you don't want to churn out too many.
Yeah.
So it's obviously trying to find a balance between the two sort of thing. Have you gone down the line of, well, I need to make this amount of tracks, I need to do this, or do this amount of remixes per week, month? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. What do you like? Do I set myself sort of targets to do, or stuff like that? Yeah, I think I definitely feel there's definitely a pressure to, to have a consistent kind of release schedule. I think it's just a sort of endemic of our times, really, the way we sort of now consume music, and it's just that, you know, if it seems like if you're not releasing, like, say, I don't know, 6 tracks a year or something, some people would argue you're not relevant in our kind of, you know, house music, dance music scene. But there's the whole other argument. You know, you can be, for example, someone like Todd Terry, who, you know, releases just 1 track a year, and it's amazing, and that's all you need to do. You know, because it's amazing. You don't need to, you know, or like Theo Parrish, or, you know, it's a real balance, and you kind of have to know your own worth, and that's really hard to judge, I think.
Would you say that, obviously working from a label's point of view with some of the artists that you help manage, do you know what I mean, do you kind of give them those schedules and sort of say you kind of need to be doing that, or are you quite happy to say, yeah, as long as you produce 1 amazing track a year, it's fine? Yeah,
I think we sort of, from the experience I've had, because I can't speak for everybody, but I think if you're starting out and you sign a new act or a new producer or whatever, you want to help break them and help sort of paint their story a bit and kind of show people what they're about. And sometimes that will take 2 or 3 releases, and sometimes they've got a lot of music in them and they want to get it all out pretty quickly. Especially in the beginning sometimes, because, you know, they might have been making it for years and they've really got into a groove now, and, you know, like you find your own style and your own, you know, way of making it, and then it just seems, to some reason, it starts flying out, you know, you just can't stop it. And I think sometimes for a label it's all about helping you get that out in the best way possible, you know, so the right people see it and it's exposed in the right way. But I certainly wouldn't say that it's, you know, you have to be right. This is the, you know, it needs to be this many and then. But you do kind of sometimes, once you've kind of committed to saying, right, well, we will release 2 EPs with you or 3 or whatever, you know, there are kind of deadlines you have to, I think, sometimes to work to. I mean, you don't have to, but it'll help you if you can be kind of a bit more regimented, because it just means that people can help promote and push your records. You know, you always have to think about, once you've started releasing records with labels, or even if you do your own label itself, the lead time, the time before, you know, from the time you finished it and get it mastered, or even not even get it mastered, but the time you finish it and, you know, you need to think about if you're going to kind of do it as a small independent or something like that, you know, who's going to promote, how are you going to promote it, you know, be it through a PR team or, you know, PR company, or how you do it yourself. You know, you've got to have some kind of a bit of a strategy, because there is that much stuff that gets released every week that just gets lost, just completely lost, and some of it's amazing, and you just never see it because it's never been presented in the right way. And that's one thing I reluctantly admit to, that it is hard. Sometimes it's half the battle is how you know, it's making it is one thing, and making it really good is one thing, and then the other half is either finding, you know, if you can't do it yourself from self-promote and release it in the right way, then, you know, ally yourself with people that do, and believe in what you know, they get what you're about and get, you know, and see what you're trying to do, and they'll help you get there. Because unfortunately, it's not as easy as it, you know, I don't think it's as easy as it used to be, just to be able to put out a great piece of music, you know, when it was just purely on vinyl or CDs, and it'd be noticed as easily. But at the same time, you know, things like YouTube and SoundCloud and stuff, things can blow up, and, you know, where a label would never take a chance on it. So it's a double-edged sword. You know, there's pluses and minuses for it. Yeah. So I guess back to the track. So as I was saying, I wanted to kind of put my spin on it, I suppose. It's a bit of a naff phrase, that really, but yeah, just the kind of more of the sound that I like, but really still again show that main central theme that Ejeka had in his track, but just put it in a different way. Probably best just playing you a couple of minutes of that as well. I'll kick it in from a little bit further on, so we can, yeah, from about here or something, from about a few bars in. Sorry, my Mac's not the most powerful. So yeah, if it does crap out at any point, you just have to bear with me. It's really old and really slow. Yeah. See if I've got anything else running.
Overdub this right.
Hey.
I should be talking over this, shouldn't I? Nobody steal this track. You can buy this track from Beatport.
Yeah.
Or from Juno. Yeah? Yeah, you want me to do this again? Yeah. Obviously, this track is being streamed on YouTube. YouTube are very sorry, but we're not going to play it all. It's got me talking over it as well. This would be a terrible DJ version to play.
get the idea of it really, of what I was trying to, or at least, sorry, this sound card's been a bit troublesome. Okay. Yeah, you get an impression of sort of what I was trying to do with the, I really like the way in the breakdown it opened up, but I just sort of wanted it to sound, well, sort of more like something that I would make, I guess, or put my kind of spin on it, and something that I would want to play out.
There's a lot more drums, definitely.
Yeah, it wasn't so stripped back. Yeah, basically. So what I'll do is I'll show you, I'll kind of go through channel by channel what I'm doing to different things and different treatments. And if we've got time towards the end, I'll show you a couple of things, like specifically in like more detail, like how to build a sort of the drum rack that I've made, and just a few little sort of production techniques as well. But
any questions at this point? You all good? Cool.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and if I go too fast, or if I'm sort of rambling a bit too quick, just put your hand up and say stop, and I'll explain it a bit more.
Stop.
Because I do have a tendency to do that. So yeah, we're probably best actually going off with the main sort of theme, really.
It's very good housekeeping, I'll just say.
Sorry?
Very good housekeeping, colour.
Oh yeah,
colours.
that was, yeah.
It's labelled nicely.
I couldn't honestly say that it always looks like that. But I would recommend when it comes to, when you're doing like the proper mix down, just to have, having things coloured and sort of separated, because you can start, when you've got like 30, 40 tracks, you just start losing and forgetting where the stuff is, and then you're solo muting things and trying to find where they are, and why is that still popping up, and you can, and it looks pretty, doesn't it? So anyway, so the main synth part, I'll probably keep the volume up of this, from Ejeka, which is really the main thing I've used. I mean, normally I would try to use a lot more of someone's stems when remixing, because usually I'll listen to the stems and listen to the track, and if I like them, then I'll take the remix on. But this one single stem was so, huge. As you can hear from hearing the original now, that's pretty much the main thing of the track, apart from the drums. There's not really a lot else going on, and that was sent to me like that. I mean, I don't know whether that was, made up by several different synths being layered up, but, that's how it came, and it sounds great. So I just kept basically going through that whole line. It's about 3 or 4 minutes long as a stem on its own, and I just almost being hypnotized by it a bit, and just getting little parts of it and making shorter loops and just messing about with it next to just a kick drum going, just to get some kind of idea. And I thought, well, it'd be nice if you had, it was almost like an arpeggiate, I always like arpeggiated lines, and so it just literally the beginning part is just that. It's not an arpeggiator or a synth line, it's just purely a really basic way. It's just, if we open up the clip piece, it's just literally like a half bar long, and I've just looped it round. But it seemed to work. I mean, it's not something I always do, and there isn't always a process that I use. And then just opening it out, doing that at different sections, so the softer part, to another section where it changes again, which kind of gives the whole impression that you're kind of always leading into that main final thing. So, it's almost having tension, and then it releases and lets it happen, and then you close back up again.
Just a word on the arrangement there. So did you kind of take that initial idea and actually just sort of slap it in the middle and work backwards to an intro? In
my head, yeah. But I didn't know, I didn't, kind of drop that at about whether it was 89 and then just go, right, let's build backwards. I tend to sort of write in a very sort of, left to right linear fashion. Well, I tend to always start with clips, because that's how I learn how to use Ableton to begin with. And sometimes I find it's quite hard to, when you've got like a groove going, you've got all clips and you keep firing them and muting them, it's quite hard to then go, all right, let's start laying it out. That's like, this part of the process is, I wouldn't say it's my least favourite, but it's the bit I find the most difficult, is being able to see 7 minutes of music in your head and knowing exactly where it's going. Because I think Ableton gives you that ability to just sort of hear little loops and not kind of see things further on. I think if you learn making stuff with Cubase or Logic or stuff, it might come easy to you. Or if you're just more of a natural musician, you know, you're always taught to write in composition and stuff.
I've got a question from the internet,
Yes.
so I'll just interject to that point. I'm new to Ableton. Does he, I'm assuming that's you, use another DAW, say Logic to write parts after getting initial ideas? Do you ever use Rewire? You know, is Ableton your sole?
Yeah, it's a good question.
workflow?
I used to, yeah. Years ago, I used to use Logic quite a lot, and used to make whole tracks in that. I only really see like DAWs as just, you know, it's like either this, you know, drill or like made by whatever, you know, Bosch, or this drill made by DeWalt. They are just, you know, vehicles to get your ideas out of your head and, you know, finished. So I you know, because people have some real snobbery about different ones, but yeah, at the time I just found there was more stuff. 'Cause I said I started using Ableton from about version 3, and there wasn't as much of all this suite of, you know, amazing kind of plugins and different things you could do with it. It was just really good for warping up pieces of audio and the whole clip thing. That was the thing that attracted me to it. So yeah, I used to use Rewire quite a bit. So I'd, you know, get some ideas going, loops going, and then rewire them into Logic. And I also used to think that Logic sounded slightly better a few versions ago.
You're not the only one who thought that.
Yeah, that used to be a big, and also, you know, when you're learning off other people as well, they're always like, no, you know, Logic sounds amazing, all this, you know, but then you realise after, and this did progressively get a lot better and a lot cleaner sounding, and I think it's just really, you know, it's just how good you are at using the tools inside. You know, I'm like a big advocate of not being, you know, you can totally be in the box and that's fine, or, you know, if you want to be all analog, that's, again, it's totally fine. It's just whatever kind of sound you want, but really it's just about how good you are at using those certain pieces of equipment. You know, you can write a whole album with a keyboard and a, you know, drum machine.
We've got some more questions, go on.
When you're starting your own tracks, how do you get sort of the drums down or the groove first, or do you have an idea that you a lead or something that's just coming to your head?
Yeah.
Like, oh, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. It can vary, literally, like day to day, week to week. You know, sometimes you get in and you feel like you just want to start writing some drums down, and that then, you know, gives you an idea for a bass line. I mean, that's probably the most usual way, but sometimes you just come in with a little melody in your head, and you kind of write down that, and then think, oh, you know, you just have an idea for a track, a vision for a track, and you sort of pad it out that way from sort of the main riff or from a bass line or any one kind of thing. So yeah, it changes really. I think if I did it totally structured right, these are the drums I'm going to use, and even the actual, you know, the drum selection and everything, and, you know, the kit selection and the palette of, you know, plugins or synths, you know. If it was the same time, if it was the same every time I got into the studio, I think I'd probably get pretty bored pretty quickly. So it's just more of to keep myself kind of inspired, really.
You mentioned as well then that you've got your own spin or your own sound.
Yeah.
What does that mean then? Like you know, you've just said you won't go back to the same
yeah.
things,
In terms of just like the sounds, the palette of sounds that I like or things that interest me, I suppose the more music you make and the more you kind of keep making it, and everyone, I guess, likes a certain thing, don't you? You know, you all like a certain sound or a certain style of music, and you kind of drift towards trying to make stuff like that, you know, probably. And I think that's with me, you know, like I'm probably very influenced by disco, and, you know, also house music. So that, but I'm influenced by a lot of things, you know, by folk music and by, you know, grunge from being into grunge when I was like 11 or something. You know, there's all different elements and they come out in different ways. But I think the more you make music, basically, to cut the answer short, because I'm going off on one again, is just that the more you make music, the more you kind of realise you develop your own sound, and sometimes you don't realise that you're doing it, but you start to do it. I think sometimes if you've had some success or had which, you know, where you've made something and then everybody kind of expects the same thing again, especially with remixes, it can be quite a difficult trap not to fall into. Or sometimes it's, you know, it's actually makes life easier for you because then people know, you know, exactly what you want. But for me, I kind of try to approach each track or each thing I remix differently because each track is different and, you know, deserves a different kind of treatment or a different approach. I suppose that's, yeah. Does that? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Any more before? Yeah?
Yeah, basically. Try it over with a smaller thing.
When you get your initial ideas down for a track, do you normally leave it for a bit before you go back to it? Like, how long would you say it takes you to progress with the track from start to finish? Like,
again, it can vary. Some days it's literally you can get the whole thing down in like 5-6 hours, but some days it's just, you get a seed of an idea and a couple of loops, and then you've hit a bit of a wall, but it's kind of an alright idea, so you just go, right, we'll park that, go make a cup of tea, start something else, and then come back to it in 2 weeks. And then sometimes you go back and you're like, dear God, what was that? Like, what on earth was I thinking? That is bobbins, and delete it. Or you go, oh, yes, now I know what it is. Now I know what I need to do to finish it. That's kind of how I tend to approach stuff, really.
cool.
I guess moving into sort of as I said, I'll go kind of systematically now, kind of through the track. So I don't know why I started always doing like kind of left to right with drums and things. I think it's maybe because I read that somewhere once, and it's kind of seeps into my brain that your drums and your bass are on the left. It's like from an old style of like on a mixing desk. You'd have tend to have your rhythm section there, and then sort of the frequency spectrum going out towards your right. I've never actually really used a mixing desk or anything like that, so I don't know why I do it. But
that is a quote from MMS Sessions.
Yeah. But there we go. Maybe one day I'll send everything through a nice big SSL. But so the kick, usually I tend to, I know lots of people always bang on about, compressors for kick drums and, EQ and stuff, but I tend to usually, although this is an exception to the rule, find a kick I really, really like the sound of and use that quite a lot, and I don't compress it, and I just ride the volume, because as soon as you start sometimes messing with compression, you can start losing the bite and the edge of stuff where it changes the sound, and you're better off kind of, and in this kind of music I think the kick needs to always come through and bite through the most. So there's one kick, there's a combination of kicks. Normally I don't really do that, but there's tons of people who are far more talented than me that will tell you, you can layer up 5 or 6 kick drums and use, EQ them all and set them all so you have this one monster kick. But I tend to just rather sift through and find something I really like and then stick with that. But this is kind of like a standard one sort of stock kick that I use. It's probably either hidden away on lots of things. I should probably, as well, while we're doing that, just get a little loop, and so we can just go through. So and this is actually the combination. I tend to use groupings a lot as well. I suppose it's like bussing you used to have like on big desks or like in Logic or whatever. And I've bussed the two together. That's the reason I've got compression on the kick series, just purely as the glue compressor. But I don't know how many of you here are using Ableton. So it's only about half, so that's good. It's not like everybody knows all these plugins and stuff. But this is kind of based on a SSL bus compressor that was originally made by Cytomic, and I think Ableton either bought them or, I don't know, just used their algorithms to make this compressor. But anyway, it's wicked. It's really, really good for gluing things together. Sometimes it's good to put on a master bus in the end, but it does exactly that. It just slightly kind of glues all the sounds together, doesn't make them sound so disparate. So that was purely because I used this other kick as well, and I wanted to sort of melt them together a bit. Now this is actually a kick and a snare, and this rack you can see is it's kind of like a custom rack that I've made, but it's made up of actually, I'll hopefully if we've got time at the end I'll show you, it's actually each one of those cells or those drum pads is has got a sampler instrument inside it, and inside, so that gives you the ability to like load in a whole bunch of kicks, like up to whatever MIDI allows you. Was it 127, 128? So, and then what I do is then map them through to like a selector knob, and then you can just go through. So, where are we? I don't think I'll be able to do it on that, but I can, but I'm just being lazy. So, oh yeah, okay. Should we get some decent signal? Sorry guys, what am I doing? Hang on, is that gone? There we go. That's more like it. Oh, it's just because of the MIDI thing. But so and then you can just scroll through, and that's the one thing, if you want to just get a bit of a start going, you can choose different sounds for combinations, instead of having to, like how it gets really boring sometimes if you do that rather than generating your own kick drums from scratch from a synth. I mean, lots of people do it, especially like with the rise of modular stuff and things like that. It's really cool, but I guess lots of us also just use samples. So instead of like when you just open this bit up here and you're just going through it and you're like
another vengeance,
and you can't really hear how it sounds against like some other pieces you've done, this is a really good way of kind of auditioning stuff really quickly. And also because it's in a drum rack, you can kind of make other things, you can put compressors on or reverbs onto it. And like with this, I just sort of sent it through the sends, which you can't quite hear that well, but the snare is really sort of sunk into quite a lot of spring reverb. And I suppose another thing I should probably mention at this point is the send channels that I use. I know there's loads of different ways to do anything in Ableton in any kind of music production. There's no right way. That's the first thing I'll always say, like whatever way that you work is cool, as long as you're getting the results that you want out of something. But I tend to send stuff through, and I've seen lots of people before, like in these kind of like videos on YouTube and stuff, where they'll have like 15, 20 reverbs on each instances on each channel, which is great if you've got like a really powerful Mac or a really powerful computer, and you can do that. But I don't, and this is more of like an old-fashioned way of, where you would on a desk, you would send it out to an actual like a reverb unit, and dial in how much you want it to send it in. So
it's a lot less CPU.
Yeah, a lot less CPU, and I think it also gives you a little bit more the track a little bit more cohesion, because you're only using a certain amount of sends and effects on all the channels. So you don't have something one with like a mega delay and another thing. There's two different kinds of reverbs here, but there's only those two. There's one that's quite short and a really spring reverb, and the other one that's massive. Like a big, or it's supposed to be like a kind of a big kind of cavernous kind of hall type sound. So that's, as I say, I'll go into that and how, if you're interested, show you how to make one of those drum kits from scratch later on. Yeah, and then just, I guess a lot of my stuff after that is just really layering sounds up in the right kind of way. Sort of the snare, there's no processing on it, it's just a TR-505 sampled snare clap sort of sound. And if you can see in the clip view, I don't know if it's hidden behind that, the big speaker in the corner, but if I can, shall I pull it up? Can you see it now? What's great about Ableton is the ability to sort of edit things inside the clips, especially version 9, is that now you can just get in, and sometimes it's nice if you've got like a steady thing like a kick, or especially with a clap or a click or a snare or something, that things change as they go through. I mean, I'm sure everybody tells you that if you have everything doing the same thing for 8 minutes, it is pretty boring. But if there's subtle differences, then it sort of gives the whole track a bit of life. So all I've done there is just brought it down 2 semitones, just so you have a low clap at the end. And when it's all layered back in, it kind of just gives a tiny bit of variation. The click, same kind of thing, it's just a finger click. I don't know whether it's something I've recorded in from ages ago, or I've just, again, nicked it from a sample pack or something. Sample packs aren't the devil to me. I don't think you should necessarily always have to self-record absolutely everything you do, but I definitely would recommend always having a mic, and if you can't find the sound, you have to just have a go at recording it. That's something I always try and do, and it's a bit more fun that way. Might take a little bit longer, but and then it's yours, isn't it? You've actually made it, and you can use it again. The only thing I've done here is just a tiny bit of EQ, just to get rid of any mud that would be at the bottom, because you don't need any information below, I don't know, 300-400 hertz with the click sound. I mean, there's nothing really there, so it's just to make sure that the bass and the drums come through nice and cleanly. Really, that's if you see lots of the EQing. Also, I should probably rewind a little bit. The track, you can see the channel right on the top, the dummy track or sidechain track or whatever you call it. It's basically just a trigger for any compressor where I'm using sidechain, and that's all it's there for. I tend to use a 4/4 kick, but you could use it with a hi-hat or anything to trigger it, and just it helps instead of having to trigger it to the actual kick where you sometimes you want to be, as you can see in my arrangement, where you want to be cutting it out, then the sidechain would stop working. So I tend to just use that all the way along. Sometimes you can just do it with a sampler and just actually write the MIDI in, and it's just a muted kick. But as the reason I'm mentioning that is because this is the first time you'll see it. I do quite a bit of sidechain compression, but on the whole, it's relatively gentle compared to kind of stuff you hear in like EDM sort of things, where it's almost like the meat of the record is having a synth that does that, opens and closes the whole, wow kind of thing. But I do like a little bit of, push and pull. I think I must have read about it a while ago. With it's really intrinsic to like loads of people's sound, isn't it? The most famous one is Daft Punk, I suppose. And that's what made me buy like an Alesis compressor and try and do it that way, and it's good, but the way that Ableton does it with just hit sidechain and route it through is a lot quicker than doing it the other way. So that's just been ever so slightly sort of compressed, sidechain compressed. And then the other thing I'm doing here on this tambourine sound is I've used a thing called the Decapitator, which is made by Sound Toys.
Nice and friendly.
Yeah, sorry.
It's just a nice, friendly sounding plugin.
Yeah, it is. You can pretty much use it on anything. Has anybody used that before at all? It's really nice. It just warms. I mean, you can dial in loads and it makes its stuff completely distort, but it also just kind of gives stuff a nice warmth, and there's different sort of flavours along the bottom. I think they're supposed to represent different valves, like a triode or a pentode, or I'm not entirely sure, so don't ask me. But the other nice thing is that you've got a mix function, which allows you to dial in a not completely wet signal, so you don't have to put it on a send.
Just a word on your plugins. Have you got any sort of like go-to plugin packages you'd recommend, or that you always use?
No, not at all. I'd just say I do tend to use quite a lot of the Sound Toys stuff. I think that's really good. I used quite a lot of the Arturia plugins, although there's none of that in this particular remix. That's what I mean. There's no real kind of set sort of thing. And a few of the Waves plugins are always really good. Things like the limiters and certain things. But again, it's really, I think that's kind of up to you guys to find your own sort of things that you like using. And I think sometimes as well that it can be massive. If you've got tons and tons of plugins, it can be total overkill. What do I use? And you end up just trying stuff out because it's there. I think after a while it's like good to just hone it down to like a small palette of EQs, compressors and delays and things. And I don't know
Do you
because
use any UAD?
I don't use any of the UAD stuff, although I've heard it's very good. Just purely because I don't have a UAD sound card or one of those little external boxes. But the thought does cross my mind about buying one before. But yeah, as I say, it's just really kind of whatever works. Another thing that I tend to use as well, quite a bit on the master channel actually, is this thing called a BX Control. It's relatively cheap. They do also do some rather more expensive and more esoteric plugins, but this is really good. It just basically means, well, the main function I use it for is just making anything below a certain signal mono. Sorry, Emma.
Sorry. Can I just double check with everyone in the you've got your change at Bonar that's causing some interfering? Thank you.
Okay, that's all right. Yeah, sorry everyone that's watching at home or whatever. It's okay. Yeah, so all I'm doing there is just making anything that's below their mono, below 700 hertz mono, and I've just given a tiny bit of width. I can't really give you some kind of a talk on mid and side processing, but all I know is that it's quite a useful technique to kind of push things that aren't really bass heavy or low frequency out. It can give you a bit more room in the mix. So yeah, so that's kind of what I'm doing there. Let's have a look. I've got enough kind of sound. So, is that actually doing anything? Yeah, here we go. Get that loop going again. So, without the decapitator, it just sounds like a little bit, a little bit flat, a little bit more like, lifeless. It kind of pushes it to the front, and same with the BX control. That's a lot more subtle, but it's just pushing things out to the sides. But also, if we go across, I mean, you can see here, I tend to pan, things like snares, hi-hats, anything of about, 500 to the, full frequency range. Kind of just either really extreme or, a little bit left and right, just to give things their own space, because apart from EQing and compression, that's another thing where you can help sounds find your room in the mix. So yeah, and then this other sort of drum sound is like an open crash cymbal that I think I recorded. This I've been using actually for years, which is really, but people go, you should probably. But there's a few things that I like using, and sometimes they'll go into retirement for years, and then sometimes a sound will come back out. But basically, it's just a crash cymbal. I'll turn this off first to explain it. It's almost like, how people use white noise and sidechain it really heavily. It's like that, but just for me, it's slightly more interesting. That's nothing to say anyone who likes using white noise in a track, that's absolutely fine. I'm not a music snob like that. It's like whatever you like making is whatever you like making. But here it was originally like a really loud attack to begin with, because it's a cymbal crash. But again, I've just used Ableton's clip function to just bring the volume down. And if you hear it from the start now, it's a bit, it's a bit too strong. Or it would be if I'm using it in the track the whole time. It's all right if it's like a signpost or a transition part, the start of a break or a breakdown or something. But I've kind of used it to give a bit of motion and a bit of movement in the track. Just put down really subtly, really quietly in the mix.
And you're side chaining it to that dummy track at the top?
It's not. That's actually, it was already recorded as a really heavily side-chained thing, and then I can just drag it out and not have to always pull out a compressor and set the side-chain levels. So that's one of the few exceptions there where I've kind of recorded it. But yeah, usually that's exactly what I've done at some point. The other thing I've done as well, which I've started to use a little bit more recently in productions, is this thing called Corpus. I think it's a resonator of some sort. I couldn't tell you because I'm not a real kind of sheer nerd, but it's... Anyone know exactly what it does? It's basically it's some kind of resonator, but it gives you kind of different mediums with which, or models different kind of mediums of which to resonate sound against. But the nice thing I like to do is kind of tune it in so it's the same key as the track, and then just dial it in, as you can see in the corner, the dry wet. I mean, it's absolutely tiny amount, like 7%, because it can be really, really wild if you want it to be. And then just turn the LFO on and sort of dial that in. It's just really a case of trial and error and moving things about until you get a nice sound. But it just gives an extra bit of movement. Sorry, I'm going to keep doing that because, right. You can hear it in there. But if I now... Can you hear that kind of weird? So it's almost sound like a radio trying to tune itself or something. But it's in a constant sort of sweep and swell and sweep and swell. And without it, I mean, that's still carrying on because it's dying out. But it just adds an extra little kind of strange element that isn't totally tuned, but it's not really out of key, and just helps make things sort of sound a bit more alive and a bit more real.
Is it just all sort of building towards a kind of moving texture?
Yes, exactly. That's probably much better, more succinct way of describing it, really. Pretty terrible at describing my own music, which is great, seeing as I've come to do a talk about it. But yeah, and then the other part of it, as I said, I'm kind of really heavily influenced by disco, and I've always been obsessed by like real hi-hats and snares. These two channels here are groups of different kinds of hi-hats. So you've got one that's just doing a straight kind of 8 rhythm, and then another one that's doing 16s. and I'm just trying to combine them together to give the track a lot more kind of energy. I mean, without them, if you hear the loop, it kind of sounds a little bit. I mean, it's cool, but with them, it's just a lot more, it's moving on a bit more. So basically, but the reason they're grouped is that I've done a thing called triple tracking. Does anyone sort of know roughly? I guess it's used a lot for vocals, but you can use it for tons of stuff, synths and things. It's basically if you want to make something sound a little bit wider and a little bit thicker. And this, that I really like these hi-hats, so I wanted to sort of make them more of the focus of the rhythm section. So all you do, all I've done here is really one is centered in the middle, and they're duplicates of the same channel. And I've just put one in the middle and panned the other two really hard left, really hard right, and then move them ever so slightly out of time of each other. I mean, like milliseconds, literally. I mean, you can do that manually, or you can do. I found a sort of a bit of a cheat. I don't know if this is, like you said, there's no right or wrong way, I suppose, as long as it works. But I've just, the delay. I think you're supposed to use it for like offset, latency with samples or sound cards. But you can also do it this way, and I've just pushed, one forward or 5. Well, sorry, this is delayed 5 milliseconds. Another one delayed 8 milliseconds. So this is all slightly out of time, and it just makes a slightly wider thing. So if I do it like, so that's on its own with them together. It's just a fraction bit wider. I mean, it's not like, you're trying to completely change the sound. It's just to make it that tiny bit wider and tiny bit more alive.
Are you ever concerned with like phase issues?
Yeah, I think you just have to be quite wary of that, because...
Watch out for that, everyone.
Yeah, but I'm no kind of real sort of technical engineer, so it's just more about, I use my ears to think, actually that sounds a bit weird and a bit buzzy, and it sounds kind of out of phase rather than just wider. And that's why you also have those two, the left and the right channel, really down low, and you just bring them in until it kind of sounds wide enough or loud enough. It's something I tend to do with vocals a lot, pretty much all the time, and it's a pretty common practice. It's quite an old-fashioned sort of studio technique, really. Yeah, and then with those as well, if they were dry, I suppose if we use this 16th one, again I've used that decapitator just to make it a bit more alive, just bring it out a bit more, and then a phaser, because actually sometimes it's quite nice to use phase if you can control it in a good way. Just helps you get that kind of movement, almost like I was doing with that corpus thing, just getting a sort of an off-kilter sort of phase to it, sort of a pitched extra sort of frequency in it. So that's really sort of the rhythm section, I guess. Is there any sort of questions? Anybody sort of following me now? I mean, some of it I don't, because I don't know how far some people are on with
various stages
of things, and also people listening at home. It might be, all this might be total jargon, or it might be really, really basic stuff. I don't know, but this is where we're at. Okay, so moving on to the bass line, sometimes it can be more complicated. It can be made up of like 2 or 3 different synths or 2 or 3 different keyboard parts and sort of gelled together. Some playing different notes in it all, and then compressing it together to make it sound like one bass line. But this is just really, really simple. Not apart from my hardware. It's just I think it's just a variation of what was a patch in Ableton using Operator, and it's just got a really nice, really weighty FM bass line. But the reason the reverb's on there, I'll show you later. It's about how you make reverse reverb, but we'll come to that in a bit. But it's actually just really got a lot of weight and a lot of punch, and a lot of long tail, because it's not like an intricate, really articulated bass line. It's just a really, really simple, almost like childish kind of da, da, da. You can have much longer tails on those notes. They can last for a lot longer. And that's kind of it with that, unless anybody else wants to ask me some more questions about it. But it's it's just really just a sound preference thing. That's how I kind of like that bass line really. And so we come back to Ejeka's part, which we kind of went through, and essentially, you know, everything was sort of built around that to kind of, as you say, build into opening out and showing that really great, you know, full section. But I suppose well, it wasn't really a tricky bit, but just kind of, you know, making that bridge from it being kind of almost like an off-kilter ARP sound into you know, the whole bar, the whole section. Yeah, it's just literally, it's just kind of breaking it down into sections, sort of, I think even making it even smaller. Yeah. So it almost sounds like a delayed one note that's been hit, but it's actually just, as you can see in the clip, it's just a loop where I've just carried it on and then just automated the volume of it to make it work. Yeah, so, and then really, as I said, I was trying to kind of embellish and enhance that whole bit from the original track. So what I've done really is just layered up, and that's, I suppose, more of a trait of what I do, is layering up sounds from different synths. Some of them will be some of my outboard kit, some of my keyboards at home, which I haven't been able to bring here today, but also I use lots of, you know, also Ableton plugins and some Arturia things, and just whatever, you know, really gets the sound I want or the job done. This is a kind of, I guess, an approximation of a kind of a sequential circuits prophet sort of sound. And I keep doing that, I'm really sorry, because it's just really annoying, isn't it? You just, yeah. So, again, kind of, it's almost like a second bass line, but it doesn't run through the whole track. But just adds a bit of weight to it. And then more of a synclavier type sound, again, using Ableton's, what is it it's using? Or is this just recorded audio? Yeah. Actually, this I think might have been from a Korg Mini XL, if anyone's really interested, but it's just like a synclavier kind of emulation.
Just for any tech heads, what sort of equipment or kit have you got in your studio?
At home, apart outside of the box, I've got a Juno 106 and a HS60, which are kind of the same sort of thing, but, well, they are effectively, but it's quite nice that I have two of them. It means you can kind of, each one's 6 voices, and you can now kind of, I have them all synced up to a MIDI, like a good Motu MIDI, is it MIDI file? Or so, I don't know, you know, the MIDI kind of USB thing where you can fire out 8 different channels of MIDI, and kind of get them to, you can almost write like 12 voices of a, you know, so it makes it like a really big, much bigger sounding synth, having 2 of them together. And then like a Bass Station 2, which is really good. I've had that the last couple of years. That's excellent, and not just for making bass lines. And yeah, Korg Mini XL I've had for years, which is really good. It does loads of different things pretty well. It's not, you know, incredible, but it's, you know, it's got some great.
Is that an evolution of the micro Korg?
It is, yeah, yeah. It just kind of looks a bit more like a Rhodes piano, but it's still got the tiny keys, and I think it's got a few more sounds, and maybe I think it's got like a slightly better engine, but it's a digital synth. It's not analog. And a Gen SX 1000, which is like a really old, well, really old, an old Italian synth. It's older than me. I think it was made in 1980 or 81. And it's just like one oscillator. There's no MIDI, no CV gate, nothing. So it's just, you play it in, you either get it right or you don't, which is nice, you know, rather than always being able to, you know, perpetually tweak something. It's like, oh, well, that's good, and you commit to it and you move on, and that's kind of a nice thing to have, or a nice element to be able to have. So yeah, going back to it's just basically what I'm trying to do is make up one sort of larger sound out of component parts, and I did it again. That's to kind of go with the synclavier. So if you know, you put them all together, it just makes it, you know, on probably a much more expensive, like, you know, like a Jupiter or some, you know, like some big, you know, Dave Smith, like a you know, the new 12 voice, what is it? What's it called? I don't know. anyway, it doesn't really matter. But just, you know, you could make that all on one synthesizer, but I'm not a synth programmer, and I just prefer doing it in layers. You can have a bit more control over it as well that way. And again, this is just I think this is actually 2 scale or 2 different octaves of the same thing from Juno. And here I'm just, yeah. That's just adding sort of weight as we're building into the track and kind of, you know, building some kind of atmosphere, just adding layers and layers as you're going through the track. As you can see, it's all into a group, and it's all side-chained a little bit, or actually quite a bit compared to some of the other things I've done. You can hear it all together. You can hear it now just stuck, and it's just literally just to get it out of the way of the kick, so the kick's still coming through and the mix doesn't sound too muddy. That's really, it's not really a musical effect I'm trying to go for. Whereas with this sort of Selena string sounding line, I am really, as you can see, cranking it. It's almost like on a limiter, wherever we are. There, you know, the ratio is really hard. And that was kind of the sound I was trying to go for. It was more of actually kind of making an effect rather than just, you know, keeping the mix kind of clean and open. And then moving on to, that's really sort of the main meat of kind of the synths, I suppose, really. You know, with the bass line in as well. You know, you can kind of see they all come together a bit. And they're all kind of playing the same. You notice they're all playing the same line as well. It's all the same thing. So it's just layering up sounds to make them sound, you know, one sound bigger. And then with the, I felt like it needed something else, like another line or something else on top, that was a bit lighter and not as heavy and weighty and imposing. And I used, it's just that, just sort of dancing away with, you know, drenched in delay. And I used a thing called, which is made by Novation, called a V station, which is an emulation of an old thing called a K station, which when I first started making music at a friend's house, he used to have it in a rack. And so I've kind of become, you know, I was quite familiar with that, or not sort of too scared of having a go with it. And all I've done here is actually, it's just making a really, really simple sound, but it's absolutely drenched in reverb and delay. Some people like that, some people think it's awful. I've done it again, sorry. See, it's just literally a really, really thin note. But if you're going to drench something in delay or reverb, I found it's best to have, you know, shorter, really, and then it becomes, you know, it gives it room to become a lot bigger or take up a lot more space. So that's why I've done that. And that's effectively kind of it in terms of main synths and rhythm. The rest of it really is effects, you know, things like signposts, I call them, you know, like crashes, things that help breakdowns or start new sections or signify different parts of the track. One thing I've used here is a channel called which is reverse reverb, which is basically parts of the track where I've recorded them really heavily through reverb and reversed them, but I'll show you if you're interested how to do that. And then other bits I just literally, again, like a really large, I think it's like an 909 clap, that's really just put through a load of delay and reverb, and it's just got a really long tail. So with other styles of this kind of stuff, you know, you'd have like a drum roll or stuff like that, whereas here I've tried not to do that. I've tried to let the kind of reverse reverb thing. I guess the most famous thing that everyone uses, you know, like Phil Collins, In the Air Tonight. Everybody's heard that, right? and the voice. I mean, that's the most, cheesy, obvious thing. But when you're 7 years old and you hear it, you think it sounds amazing. So that's always been in the back of my mind. How can you do that somewhere?
Phil Collins.
Yeah, but not that I ever wanted to be Phil Collins. But it just, for me, that is like a really great sort of sound that gives kind of a bit of anticipation that something's going to happen, or something you're building up into something without it being just an obvious reverse cymbal going, or a whoosh just going whoop. Not that, again, that is a wrong thing to do at all, but it's just purely what I like to do.
Are these signposting bits that do you generally do them last and go, right, I need to kind of join all these sections together and make it smoother?
Yeah, usually, yeah.
Bit by bit?
Yeah,
Okay.
usually, yeah. I find that if it feels like it needs it, then I will, but if it's flowing really nicely, then sometimes I won't bother. Well, not won't bother, like I can't be bothered, but as in it just doesn't need it. Sometimes the track doesn't. It just, the bass line drops in it. It doesn't need like really over the top kind of signposts. And it also depends on the style of music that you're making. Yeah. So that's, I suppose, why, or that's how I go about it. Yeah, it's just I tend to arrange most of the track and then do it. But sometimes I'll have put a few crashes in or a few things in to do it. Sorry.
Yeah, you've got like quite a lot of elements there. Is there anything, like any process that you go through to get like inspiration?
I'll just repeat that question.
Yeah, sure.
You've got quite a lot of processes there.
Like
I've forgotten.
To the track?
Elements of the track.
What have you used to,
What have you used
to get inspiration?
to get inspiration? Sorry, that was really bad.
With that's a really good question. It's really, with this, because it's the remix, and as I said, it's all about that I liked the original, or I liked a certain part of the original. It's that whole bit of, now for some reason it's gone completely quiet. But the original, that's because I'm muting the wrong thing, or soloing the wrong thing, that's why. It's that, for this, it's, I just wanted to build around that and try and create sounds that would complement it and enhance it. So that's where the inspiration came from, that. And obviously I have a huge love for, as you can hear, like kind of polyphonic, sort of wide, sort of brassy sounding-ish synths that are all slightly side-chained and do stuff like that. So that's, mixed with that, it's kind of, that's where the inspiration comes from, really. Yeah, so I suppose, without kind of going into too much detail about, or actually, kind of showing you how the reverse reverb works, that's pretty much what makes up the whole of the track. Is there, I suppose, I could go through explain, there's, little bits of, compression and EQ. I tend to, just general rules that I go through is, once I'm happy with the arrangement and I know that that's what it's going to be, I'll go through and make sure every single channel, there isn't, say like, you just going through an EQ and say all the bass out of, or some of the bass out of a snare track, or just whatever it feels like it needs. So everything's got its place, you know what I mean? Or you're sweeping out, high frequency from a bass lead or a bass line that doesn't necessarily need it if it doesn't have that information there, because there's things that it'll eat into your headroom basically. But other than that, that's just like, I kind of call it good housekeeping, really. It's just trying to make things a bit tidy and just panning. Compression, it's a totally personal thing, and so I wouldn't really be here to kind of lecture you on like, this is how you do it and that's what you do. I always kind of do it on feel and on my ears. And what kind of compressors you use as well. It's purely, you can, again, it's down to personal choice.
Do you master your own stuff, or do you send it off? Let the label deal with it?
I do eventually, yeah, but I tend to, do a rough kind of master. So on the master channel, just so when I'm sending it out to people, because a lot of A&R people, well, not a lot of A&R people, but people won't sometimes get what it, what the finished product would sound like if you didn't do it. And also just to get a bit of a vibe of what you want it to sound like yourself in the end. I do like what's called like a reference master. And this is, I suppose, the chain of plugins. Like I was saying before about the BX control, is really good. I just make sure that everything under a certain, it varies track to track, but say here it's about 130, 140 hertz is mono. That's purely because if you keep bass lines and things mono, if you're playing them in nightclubs and stuff, there isn't kind of necessarily kind of as much any worry about phasing issues, but also just if you have bass that's in stereo and you've got speakers that are 20, 30 feet apart, they'll you almost get like a volume drop from side of the room, and it kind of loses its power and it doesn't sound as clean and as tight. So that's why it's good to have things in mono in the really low frequencies. I mean, some people only do it up to like 50 or 100 hertz, just the sub, because like even with like a Juno 106, the bass is in stereo, but and past a certain frequency it sounds great, it sounds really wide, but sometimes it can cause problems in the mix. Another thing I've done here is just again using that kind of mid-side processing and just given actually quite a bit of width to this. Let me just kind of loop it up. So without at this point, it's all really subtle things, really subtle changes to the sound. All your drastic stuff and your drastic EQ, and you should be fixing that in your individual stems. If you're having to do drastic things to stuff here, it's kind of you need to go back, just go back and look through and see where the problem is. Don't try and fix it in your master channel. That's my opinion anyway. And then this actually I found a few months ago. It's just like a free plugin, and it's really good. It's like a mastering EQ.
Free?
It's free,
Awesome.
believe it or not. And it has this bizarre thing where it's like a super high boost at 40 kilohertz, which is like 20 kilohertz past human hearing range. It's bananas. So in theory, it doesn't really work, but obviously, if you imagine
Dogs, yeah.
what it does, I'm imagining is that it's like everything is on a gentle, like a curve, if you have with EQs and stuff. So even though it's pulling things up at 40 hertz, it's doing it really, like on that slope, that curve, it's doing it really, really gently to the stuff at 20, 10, 20, really, really gently, and giving it kind of a bit more air. So it's a really subtle way of doing it. And it just, I was quite surprised. It does kind of sound really, really good. I mean, off. It's really, really, as I say, these are all really gentle things that I do. And then, as I said before, Waves does loads of amazing plugins, but this is just a really basic one and quite a cheap one to buy. The L1 limiter. It's been around for like forever. But just while you're getting as I say, just a reference master, so you can hear what it would sound like and so you can play it out. That's a really good thing to do. How I get to like minus 4.5 dB is just purely I'll start with both of them there and use the blue section and just drag them both down until I can feel it's compressing a little bit, and then just drag that back up to about 0.2, because I'm sure these days that doesn't happen. You have like digital clipping, but it's just better to be safe than sorry sometimes. Just have things at just under 0. So yeah, that's with compression. And then this, again, is another free plugin, which is really good to have, which is a range meter, which just kind of shows you dynamic range, which is kind of just as important to a master and engineer when you go to send it off to them. It isn't about, because people say, you should always have it at like minus 6 dB or minus 3 dB when you send it off for mastering. The output of the gain on your master channel. But as far as I understand, speaking to lots of people, that isn't really really a hard and fast rule. It's more about how much dynamic range you've got when you've got all your, all of your compressors and effects off. And if you're hitting kind of green, I always find colours nice and simple. If you're hitting kind of green and sort of kind of yellowy, orangey, gold kind of colour around there, anywhere between kind of 8 and 12, minus 8 and 12 dB is quite a good sort of range, but I'm sure there'll be somebody else telling me that it should be much lower than that, or you could squeeze more out of it, but I tend to find that that's good. And also, when you make this reference master, I think it's good to send that off to the mastering engineer, just purely so he gets an idea of what you were trying to go for and how much you were trying to squash it and glue it all together. because you know a good mastering engineer will take that on board and then go, right, well I can one up that, I can make that better than what you were, I can see where you were going with it, but I'm going to make this sound amazing for you. So that's kind of about mastering really. Is there any other sort of questions or any?
Sure.
Do you do sort of like field recordings or sort of sound design things? Do you separate that from your process of creating a full track, say, or do you fuse them together, or do you?
Yeah, I have a bank of in my kind of favourite bits. I've got like I think it's always used to. I've had a little stereo field recorder for years actually, and where is it? It'll be in loops and samples. Where are we? Yeah, it's just under. Rather offensively weird. So yeah, and that's kind of just strange things that I've either found. So, you know, like I've just hung the mic outside. I don't know how well people are going to be able to hear this because it'll be really, really quiet. But that's just, yeah, you can barely even hear it. But that's just rain outside my studio window. Or like in Croatia, there's a festival that I've played at called the Garden Festival. And it used to be near a town called Zadar. And it has, in the harbour of Zadar, there's a thing called the sea organ, which is absolutely mad sounding thing, and it's controlled by the power of the waves. It just makes really odd sound, you know, really odd sounds like that. And then sort of like when I went away to Istanbul or places, I just sort of recorded street sounds and people walking by, or you know, just yeah. So I do, yeah. So short answer is, I actually do have a lot, but how much of that actually ends up in every track is pretty limited, I'd say. But it's always nice to have that there, just to get odd sounds. And you know, for a fact, I always like the idea, like, you know, from being a record collector and a record, you know, is that that's really going on quite well. It's quite nice, makes us feel like we're somewhere else. Yeah, is that, it's real. Oh, that's why. Is it because it's? Should we just turn that off? That's better. Yeah, it's been bundled up in the back of a car. Yeah, it just because it's sounds that nobody else will have, even as you know, tiny and as little as it is in your own head. It's like that is a little bit of something that nobody else has got anywhere else in the world. You know, in any of all these sample packs, that's your own thing. So yeah, I definitely would advocate doing things like that, and also trying to turn some of those sounds into snares or into kick drums or into synth lines. Sampler is a really good tool for doing that. If you've got the time and the patience to do it, you know, you can end up creating some amazing things from it. Yeah. Would anyone like to? Any more questions at this point? Yeah.
Yeah, a couple. Alex.
I'd quite like to know, like, if you have any influences, like producers or tracks or favourite labels.
Yeah.
Any influences?
Any
producers,
influences?
labels.
Yeah, there's a huge. Oh, that's like. Yeah, it's a good. Really difficult. I mean, it's huge, really. Everyone from people like Carl Craig to you know, someone who helped release my first few records, Ilya Rudman. I mean, the way he approaches music and what he does, you know, everything's completely analog and recorded through a desk, and the sounds that he goes for and the style, it's really authentic. It's just little, yeah, very much like a magpie like that. I just sort of take inspiration from, you know, different people, and you know, you kind of end up making your own sort of thing out of that. But they're quite disparate, you know, from even techno producers like Monolake, and you know how they use Ableton and stuff. I find that really fascinating. You know, to you know, probably people like Prince, who I'm absolutely obsessed with, or have been since I was about 8 years old. And just even, you know, and how he gets, you know, how he got drum sounds and how he used the Linn drum machine. And yeah, I'm a big fan of doing that, like researching on how people make stuff, and not kind of necessarily trying to copy it, but just sort of like think, oh, well, how could I use that in some way, or how can I develop that, or what does that, you know, how would that apply to what I want to do?
Just to sort of echo that, do you think it's important, you know, for people that are really into one genre, for example, to actually listen to a range of different things?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the more music you listen to outside of, you know, what you like, it's like with reading, isn't it? It's like, you don't just, or I don't, don't just read the newspapers that agree with your views. It's good to read like other things and other articles to challenge them and to, still see whether it's right, or maybe I'm missing out on something, that somebody else is doing. And it might be that you don't like 70% of what they do, but there's like 30% of it that's absolute gold, and you think, yeah, I could, I like what he's doing there. And, even if it's just a production technique you can hear he's doing, it's like, oh, I could do that in this, and no one's doing that in what I'm doing, in my sort of field or my sort of genre. Yeah, definitely.
It was just like how long before you actually approached the label and things like that?
How long was it before you approached the label and had your release?
Ages, actually. I was really, really shy with it. The first record I ever made, from the first day I started making it to it actually being released, took 2 years. I mean, that was partly because I was, still learning as I was making it. But yeah, it's a confidence thing, isn't it, for a lot of people? But the one thing I would say is don't be as shy as I was. Kind of, if you feel, obviously make sure that you're happy with it, because once it's gone and once it's out into the world, if you're trying to do it because you want to further your DJ career, or you want to, sort of, get out there and do it, then, be sure that that's what you want released, because once it's out there, you can't take it back, and it'll be on Discogs and on YouTube now forever. So always be confident in what you're doing, but, kind of, yeah, don't be afraid to kind of, get it out there and make friends and make contacts, and also get to know. I think another thing is, is get to try and know the people. If you've got an affinity with a certain sound, a certain label, is trying to get to know some of those people, and because I've always found one thing with A&R and also getting sent promos and things is that if it shouldn't be that way, but if you do know the person, or if you kind of you can put a face to the name and you know something about them, sometimes it does help. It's like you will, when you've got 300 promos in your inbox, you kind of will go, I'll give that, you will just, it's just human nature, you'll tend to give them slightly more time of day than someone else, or that it is to me. I mean, other people say that's disgusting, that you shouldn't, everybody should be completely egalitarian, but, yeah, that's my sort of view on it. Would anybody be interested in seeing how you make one of those kind of drum racks where they're all sort of individual, where there's lots of drum hits in one single pad? Should we sort of go through that?
People nodding.
Yeah. Okay. It's a relatively simple thing, and you can take it as far as you want. You can just do it literally that, as to kind of get your sort of ideas going, and just have like 100 drum set, 127 samples in each cell, and just pan through them and then go from there. But you can start adding like compressors onto them and reverbs, and then you save it, and that will always be like your go-to drum kit that you can go through. But basically, I just find it really good to get ideas out, get a drum, like a drum loop going, and keep things a bit more original, and always going for the same pattern. So you kind of start off with just an open drum rack. You might have to be patient with me, because this is obviously the first time I've ever demoed or showed this to anyone properly outside of a studio.
It's okay, we're all friends.
So yeah, so be gentle. And then basically you just get a sampler and you drag it into the cell, or into the the drum pad there, and you can do that. I would recommend doing it, say, I don't know, for 4 to begin with. And I think it's probably like a maximum of about 8, really, that you could do. But so what you've got there is the ability now to load whatever, like up to 120 odd samples into that one single, hit. So let's just go to some of my favourite bits and pieces, and yeah. So say like drums. Go through all these. This is like from I can't remember what sample pack it's from, but it's from something or other. Or it might, to be honest, this actually could just be a collection of things I've gathered over the years from bits and pieces and nicked off records. But yeah, you just go literally, for example, for speed and convenience, drag all those over across, and then so you've got like 62 hits. You can go through and keep adding more and more until it's full. Now, because of Ableton Live 9, and I've started using 2 screens at home, for some reason I now have to get the zone thing come up, I now have to use the other screen. So now you can see all of the samples are all there. So what you want to do is go to the select section on here in the zone area, and now when you hit it, that's massive. They'll all play all at the same time, which isn't, you know, there's lots of people that would say that's good, but it's just, yeah, you can't tell which one's which. So what you want to do then is just double click, or do you know, hold it 2 fingers down? Is that right? Yeah. Hang on. Yeah. Where are we? No, come on. Oh, that's right. Because while you've got these all highlighted, so it's Apple and then all, and then a little menu drops down. And what you want to do is distribute the ranges equally. So you've got that, and then if you go there, different kick. But obviously that's still a bit of a pain in the bum, isn't it? So, you know, having to just go across. But what you can do now is you've got these things called macros rather, which I didn't use ever for, well, hardly anything, apart from when I was, you know, sort of trying to program filters on synths and stuff. But so then what you do is you, again, double click, or, you know, 2-finger click. Is it like right click on a PC or something? Yeah. And then you map to macro. So macros, map it to macro 1, for example. And then so you don't forget what it is, name it Apple R, you know, kick, picker, I don't know, or whatever. And then that means you can, if I'm right, is that right? I don't know if we'll try and, yeah. You can then just basically scroll through. As you see it moving on the top? So you can just, but obviously the beauty of that is then you can draw in like a really simple, you know, MIDI pattern like that. And, oh, hang on, no, let me just do it the other way. I'm self-taught, so I'm completely cack-handed in terms of like how you write, you know, how you probably do things. There's probably people watching this going, I can't believe he's been so slow. But yeah, you know, if you don't want to kind of play it like that, and you're kind of more of someone that writes drums in, so there straight away, you know, you just fire the clip off, you know, and you can just go through and select, you know, sound of drum you like, and then off that you can then start adding compressors or anything to it. And so, you know, again, the same with, and this is where it kind of sort of starts to come into its own, is picking, you know, combinations of, you know, you go, okay, right, I found a kick that I like, and then you go, say, like another bank of snares that you've, you know, you might have just bought from a sample pack, or you've recorded with your field recorder or whatever. You go through and sorry, this is again a bit cack-handed because I'm having to do it that way. But yeah, you go to the second sampler that you've loaded up, and you drag. Oh, hang on. What am I doing? But yeah, you get the impression. I mean, it doesn't need to be 127, but you drag a bunch in like that. Same thing again. In the select section, Apple all, select them all, distribute the ranges equally, and then quickly just map it to macro 2. You know, name it so you don't forget, because that is really, that's quite, although normally I wouldn't say you have to name stuff, but with this it's kind of useful because it's pretty easy to forget which knob does what. And then, you know, you've got a bunch of snares you can start picking from. So, you know, if you, this really works like well if you do kind of make house music or stuff that's 4/4, you know, so you drop in your snares, and, you know, that's really quiet, so that's because I'm using a different section, because it's not firing anything. There we go. And straight away, you know, you can start playing around with combinations of, you know, different kinds of snares and kicks, and, you know.
You can see how that really speeds up your workflow just in generally opening up, starting a new track, and you've
Yeah.
already got that
Yeah,
kit saved
definitely.
with 127 or 28.
Definitely, definitely.
Options
And
for all the drums.
like, obviously that seems like a bit of a faff to do it every time you start a new track, but if you do it once with a bunch of, you know, say go through and really work through, because it's, I guess, you know, the more time you start making music, the more you'll collect samples and more, you know, huge library of material. is to kind of sift through and refine it, and then pick like a bunch of your favourite sounds and load them into the, certainly with like a kick, snare, clap, whatever, hi-hat, cymbal, whatever it is you want it to be, and load them up. And then once you've done that one, you can always kind of pull it in. So what I'll do is do the, classic sort of Blue Peter, here's one, or Delia Smith, here's one I made earlier, and show you kind of, this isn't as far as you can take it, but it's kind of a lot more developed. Yeah, is that it? Yeah, okay. So, and this is where I've kind of got lots of different things doing lots of different, so, instead of having to always, trawl through samples and trawl through, and also, how you like your compression settings, and I like sort of phase on certain, certain elements, and reverbs on in a certain way, straight away you've got your kind of sound of drums, and you can go through and pick them, and then each time you say, oh, I wanted to add a reverb that you really like, you just save that version, and it's the constantly evolving thing that straight away you can go to. It's your drum kit that or much more like your kind of sounds that you're into in your drum kit that you've made. But so like you can see here, I've split it off into two sections, like I was saying, that with this, like I was saying about, I don't really like to compress kick drums that much, so I've just got two massive kicks and not compress them. And those are the only two kicks that I work with in this instance. And then, but there's loads of different, toms that are all, where are we? And, you can just roll through those, same with, snares, wherever they are, snare. And that is grouped to a totally different thing. So if we go to you can see here, so like, that's just literally those two kick drums that I kind of found after hours and hours of listening to kick drums. They were my favourites for this year or for this month or whatever. And then this is all completely controlled by something else. That's got a different compressor on it, and it's got a lexicon reverb to affect the snares and the sounds, but I don't want that going to the kick. The kick I always like to have dry and sort of really clean and crisp. It's basically like a massive amount of possibilities. You can keep modifying it, and then just save it, and it's always a good starting point. When you start thinking, yeah, I'd like to write something, or the other way around, you've got a really good riff or something you've written, and then you want to get some drums down really quickly. That's a really good thing to do.
It's a really good workflow hack. I'll give you that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Have you got any more?
Yeah, I suppose I'll touch back on the reverse reverb technique. There's tons of ways of doing this, and this is just one of them. And I'm sure there is probably a plugin that actually does it somewhere, like a really expensive reverb or delay plugin that does it. But the best way I find to do it and having more control is the way I'm going to show you. So this is basically a good sort of example of it is where I did it with the bass line. What you're trying to do let's just kind of remind ourselves of where we're at with it actually, is create and like a reverse sort of atmospheric kind of sweep, leading into the sound that's about to start. So what you're doing really is just drenching that sound in reverb. So for example, with here I've got it, I think probably for the bass line. So no, that's again the same thing, but a slightly quieter volume. But so let me show you. So here I've got reverb on, and you don't slap it straight on. It doesn't need, you can use like a non-native reverb plugin, but I think Ableton's reverb's just as good for this purpose. And make it really big. Tend to cut out the low frequencies a little bit, like right down the bottom, but you don't have to. And as long as the decay time is really pretty long, that's massive, like 9 seconds. It's pretty big. And it also works as well with you know, like elongate, you know, it's not like a really, I was saying before about heavily articulated, you know, where it's like a solo and it's noodling off straight away. It's like one, you know, continuous sort of note or continuous sound. This kind of technique works best with. So what you do is you have like a channel set up like I have there, and you route the audio coming out of, say, this bass line into, what's it called, number 17, FM bass. So, and then you just basically record that sound coming in with the reverb directly on that channel, and it's all. And also, I should say, the dry and wet is 100%. It's fully up. So you just literally little recording. Just let it tail off. Okay, and then so what you've got there is, you know, the sound of it be recorded. Also good just to edit out anything else that's happening after that. This is really, really simple. All you do now is just reverse it. It's really good. I mean, it might be a lot harder to do in Logic or in other things, but like in Ableton with clips and stuff, and you've got like, just hit reverse, and then the only thing you do now is obviously don't always remember to knock that reverb back off, or else you just get a load of mud. And you just bring it back to roughly where the start of the bass line or whatever the note is that you're leading up to starts, and you can just drag it kind of. This is kind of done totally by ear, just, you know, moving it. You can either have it directly on the one or lead in, so there's a little bit of overlap, or and so then you get that kind of. And it just kind of gives you that kind of anticipation in that lead that sometimes, like, subconsciously your ears are ready for that sound to happen, if you know what I mean. But it's really good also with vocals, obviously, Phil Collins reference. But yeah, you know, but like I say, it always tends to work with either short, sharp sounds or, you know, ones that don't change or modulate or do a lot, because you know that you get a nice even sort of sweep as the sound, you know, rises up and, you know, decays. So that's, yeah, kind of the two techniques I kind of wanted to cover, really. Was there anything else anybody wanted to sort of?
Got any questions? Yeah, Ben.
When you make music as PBR Streetgang, what you find is the most efficient way to work? Do you like work together and chip in, or do you like do it separately and like send each other's tracks?
I'm just going to repeat that question. So when
yeah,
you make
sure.
music as PBR Streetgang, how do you find you work best?
Yeah, we tend to find. I mean, we've been making music now for about 7 or 8 years together. It's always. I mean, I have done remote projects, and we do some stuff remotely. As Tom doesn't live in Leeds anymore, he lives in London, or he's moved recently. And but we still try and have like at least a couple of weeks out of the month where Tom comes up and we work in the studio together. We just find that it's good to get sort of a couple of ideas, and, you know, Tom will ping something over to me, or I'll ping something over to him, and, you know, we see what we think about it and we have a chat. But yeah, the majority of everything is always done together in a studio. I just tend to find, I don't know whether it's because I'm old or what, that yeah, I can work a lot quicker when somebody's in the room. And also because, you know, we've been friends for a lot longer than we've been making music together and been DJing together a lot longer than that, that we tend to, you know, bounce ideas off each other and sort of understand what each other wants without saying too much pretty quickly when we're in a room together, rather than, you know, down the end of Skype. So yeah, as much as it is you know, can be a bit of a logistical pain, it's definitely worth it. Was there anybody else that was sort of curious about that? Okay, cool. Yeah. Just trying to think what else I can.
What are the sort of benefits do you find with working with Tom as opposed to yourself? Do you have a preference? Can you say that?
Yeah, the kind of, there isn't so much crippling self-doubt, I think, is probably that everybody has, you know, when you're making music on your own, like 5 minutes, you're thinking this is brilliant, oh, this is ace. And then you make a cup of tea and come back and you go, what, you know, again, like I was saying, what on earth is that, that's not, and you just talk yourself out of it. Whereas if you think that somebody else thinks it's good and you respect their opinion, then you think you're onto something, and sometimes things can develop a lot quicker that way. And also the other way around, that if it is a bit pony and you just going off and indulging yourself on noodling around, kind of making a patch on a synth, then it's great to have someone else to help you kind of rein it in and kind of keep a bit of a focus on what you set out to do at the start of that day, or what the project is, or what the track's about, rather than you can start off, it's so easy, isn't it, to start with, thinking, right, I'm going to make this, and then you end up doing, by the end of it, it sounds completely different. And that sometimes is great, but if you really genuinely did want to make that one sort of thing, and you've ended up something else because no one else has gone, hang on, we're going off the point here, let's stick to trying to make that. But that is also a valid way of making music as well, like just start randomly with one idea and just see where it takes you. That does happen a lot. Yeah. I guess that's kind of, yes.
Alex, yeah.
Are there any little tricks you've got up your sleeve to kickstart creativity when you're going to those you don't really know what to do next?
Creativity kickstarts.
Creativity kickstarts.
Have a cup of tea?
Yeah, tea is essential. Living in Yorkshire, tea is absolutely essential. It's the beginning of every good session of any work worth its while. Tea, yeah, cup of tea. That's it. Yeah, no, that's it really. No, I don't know. There's tons of different ways. I mean, to begin with, I was always very much sample based and kind of edits based. As you sort of learning and being more confident with using making music. So yeah, having a good record collection for me is always one. Is just being able to dig in and just listen to records. If you're finding you're totally barren of ideas, just kind of listening to some of your favourite records and bits and pieces, even just to get you into that kind of frame of mind and feeling inspired and feeling like, yeah, I want to make music. And then other times, yeah, that things like that with the kick drum, the drum rack, sort of the kick, the hit selector I kind of showed you. That's sometimes just playing around with that for a little while can kind of, even though it's just literally a kick and a snare and a hi-hat or something, but the way they kind of work together can sometimes make me think of straight away like a bass line that should go with it or stuff like that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
How important would you say DJing has been kind of punctuating your production, if that makes sense?
You know what? If I'm honest, I wouldn't be able to say because I don't know any different, but I would imagine it's actually huge. It's really a massive influence, whether I realise it or not, because it's, I've always come from a DJ sensibility where it's more about, it is partly about, making people dance and entertaining to an extent, not, doing cartwheels or throwing cake or whatever, but, and making people dance and making sure they have a good time. And, while as much as you are trying to show them and play people records that you're really passionate about and you love, and that's why you're playing them, and hopefully that'll rub off, and that's why people, part of the reason why people like it. But always being mindful of that people have paid money to come into a nightclub or into a bar or somewhere and, expect something. I guess that's kind of formed a little bit of, certainly in the, my latter years of making music. Yeah, I think to begin with it was more about purely just experimenting and see what came out. But yeah, sorry, did somebody else have it? Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think is the most important aspect in terms of making the transition from bedroom to kind of getting a release?
What is the most important aspect of kind of making the jump from being a bedroom producer to getting a release?
It's a really tough question.
It is.
It's a good question. It's a really tough one. I don't know. I mean, for me, because the whole process of that, from starting to make music and dabbling with it to actually getting a release, took 3 or 4 years. And I'm sure most people, and probably the reason why most of you are on courses here, is because you don't want to take that amount of time or waste that. I mean, some people might, just doing it because it interests you and you're learning about it. But so it's really hard for me to tell because I probably I did so many things wrong on the way to to kind of get it. What's the most important thing? Yeah, it's really difficult.
From an outsider, you seem like you were in the right scene. You know, you moved up to Leeds, you were involved with a night.
Yeah.
You got involved with a label, you were working at a record store, you know, it's kind of like quite
Yeah.
a lot of tick boxes.
Yeah,
in
I think
terms
it
of
was.
the right people.
I think you probably, that's kind of a huge thing there. Actually, you've kind of hit on. I think I'd realised that sort of DJing and making music and, you know, to begin with, you know, putting on parties and DJing, that was what I wanted to do. I just probably didn't have the confidence to say, right, I actually really want to make music for years. You know, I was probably too scared to, or admit that, you know, that's what I was going to do as a job, and, you know, that I wasn't going to have a plan B or do anything else. So I think realising, admitting that to yourself is probably quite a key thing. And then you kind of, once you realise there's sort of no turning back, then you kind of end up absorbing yourself, you know, inadvertently you end up absorbing yourself in a scene that you like, that you're passionate about, and a music that you like, and then you end up making friends. Like I, you know, started working at a record shop, and then I ended up meeting other people that made music and other DJs, and you know, you find your own community. I mean, that's, you know, it's an organic way of doing it. I mean, of course, yeah, you can make music in your studio, and you can send stuff off to labels, you know, with a nice little cover and email, or you know, a CD or whatever, or send them a USB in the post, or. But for me, it tended to be that I was, you know, surrounded by like-minded people, and I was just sort of more drawn to them, you know, wanted to be part of something. And that's how it kind of ended up, you know, me getting a first release. Although, that said, slight contradiction to it, my first release was with a Croatian label, with a guy I'd never met, who had only ever spoken to on the phone. And he heard a track that I put up on, I think it was MySpace at the time, and was, you know, really liked it. But the reason he knew about me was because I was working at the record label, and he had some, you know, contact with the label manager, and I guess, checked who had worked at the, you know, the office, and noticed that I'd made some music, and then literally just rang me up out of the blue and was like, look, I want to press this up. So yeah, you know, it's giving yourself opportunities, basically. That's, I think, yeah, after a 10-minute answer, yeah. Yeah, it's just allowing yourself to be, giving yourself those opportunities, being in the positions where you can make things happen. You know, luck, I always say, is like, you know, it's hard work and sort of preparation. It's allowing yourself to be in those positions. You know, you're not always going to think you're going to get the breaks you want, and you always think, you know, this should happen, that should happen. But, you know, as long as you're kind of moving in the right direction, you know, things will kind of happen. Yeah, that's sort of, I guess, it really. It's quite a long answer for such a short,
Oh, it's a good answer.
question. Yeah.
Alex, yeah?
I'm just interested in knowing what tracks you've done that you're most proud of. Are there any
What tracks are you most proud of?
stand out that you think so relevant there?
That's a really good one. At the time, whenever I finish something, it's usually, that's the thing I'm usually most proud, you know, because when it's stuff I'm making for myself, it is, you know, literally I'm putting everything into it. That's, you see, you know, blood, sweat and tears, heart and soul, whatever cliche you want to use, that's what I'm trying to do. So at the time, it's whatever is the one. I don't know, the things that I'd like to listen back, or I can listen back to and go, oh, that wasn't, so, you know, I don't cringe at listening to them again. I did a remix for a band called Mitzi, that was called All I Heard, which is, they're a fantastic band from Australia, who released on, is it Future Classic, that I think are now kind of quite a big label. You know, they've got like Flume and Jaguar Mar, but at the time they weren't, you know, that big, I guess. And they actually, I think, like released like my second record. Yeah, that I just really like. I mean, it was just, but at the same time, it's not like something I'm most proud of because it wasn't original, it was a remix, but just how I managed to, it was quite a fast, like 130 BPM energetic disco record, and I sort of turned it into kind of more of like a Balearic, you know, bass guitar led, and but the parts I had for it were absolutely beautiful. Everything was perfect, so you were just redirecting them in the right way. So I was kind of pleased with myself that I didn't, you know, kind of go bonkers or try to make something that was like a super high energy record, you know, do something that was out that it didn't need, you know. It was just kind of showing a different side to what was already some really beautiful music. Yeah, originals, it's, I don't know. Yeah, that's, yeah, I do quite a lot of it. Sorry, somebody just said Janet Comes Lately. Yeah, as you go on my SoundCloud, there's lots of sort of edits and things. That it's Janet Jackson. It's just an edit of Janet Jackson, really. So yeah, anyone, Janet's lawyers, I'm now in a lot of trouble. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I suppose I don't know the things I've done on Needwant. I suppose all of those kind of singles, they'll have all been, the 3 or 4 EPs I've done on there are probably kind of things I've been most proud of, I guess. Although there's one actually that's really fun that has never actually come out. It was a remix I did of a guy called Bonar Bradberry, who is, have you ever heard, I don't know who's really into the disco here, but it's the, what are they called? The Black Devil Disco Club. And it was basically his moniker for, it was like a album that he put out in about 78, I think it was, and it's miles ahead of its time. It sounds like sort of like Luke Vibert or like Kerrier District now. And I got the opportunity to remix that, and it was kind of done for it was done really for library music, bizarrely, but it ended up being really, I ended up being really pleased with that, and no one's ever heard it, and I don't think I've even put it up on SoundCloud, so maybe I'll do that when I get home.
Yay!
Yeah.
That'd be great. Have we got any last questions before we wrap it up?
How many hours a day do you do in the studio?
How many hours a day do you do in the studio?
It really varies. Some days it can be like 8. Some days it'll be 3. Some days it'll be 12. But yeah, it's quite hard. The more I've become, and as me and Tom as PBR as well, PBR Streetgang, have become busy with gigging sort of outside of the country and doing, having other commitments. It's sometimes hard to find that every day, like 5 days a week. So sometimes you overcompensate and you spend 12 hours doing stuff. But yeah, it's just about finding a balance, really. But that's the nice thing about this kind of work is that, and unfortunately I have a position where I've got a studio that I don't have neighbours to bother or people to annoy and keep working out. I used to, I would always work between the hours of 9 and 5 just to be respectful to people around me. And also sometimes it's quite nice to do that. It depends what kind of person you are, doesn't it? If you're a nighttime person or not. But yeah, I find but you're saying about just about the hours. I find if I haven't made any music for a few weeks, then I noticeably become more like irritable and kind of, it is quite a cathartic exercise, even if you don't make anything that's any good. Just the actual ability of creating something is quite nice. So.
Yeah, you said you made quite a few mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
To where you managed to get to.
Yeah.
The end key points that you could say to people.
Yeah.
Guys who are obviously trying to get there, like any.
You've made lots of mistakes along the way. I don't know what the question was.
So I just wanted to find out what those mistakes
What were the mistakes?
Right, we could have another like session on the cock-ups I've made. And saying that before I answer that, I wouldn't say that I'm anywhere feel like I'm like at a point or a level where it's just an ongoing thing. It's just more of your development. I don't feel ever like I'm satisfied or I've made it or that kind of thing. It's just a different stage of your kind of your life or your career or whatever. Yeah, as I was saying before, I think one of the biggest ones is not asking for help. It's just thinking that it's fine, you can do it, you'll be able to work it out yourself. That's a really important thing, is like if you feel like, don't feel like you're burdening your friends or people that that have, had more experience or more knowledge than you. 9 times out of 10 they'll be quite flattered that you ask them and quite sort of jump at the chance to show you how to do it. That would be one. And yeah, another thing, doubting yourself is a really, and it's that hard mix, isn't it, of being too shy and too kind of reserved and not going up and kind of making things happen for yourself and approaching labels and if you're going for a residency, going to that club and meeting the residents and meeting the promoter and finding things out and making yourself a part of it. Just get out there and do more of that. I've found it quite easy to be quite reserved and be kind of quite shy and not having enough belief in yourself. If you've decided, there'll be some of you sat in this room now that this is what you're going to do and you're going to give it your best crack. Don't at any point start thinking, oh, I don't know, maybe I should bail out or I should do, go at it until you really, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But, there will be a point because you won't be able to whether financially or, you know, creatively, there'll be nothing left. You won't be able to do it anymore. But don't stop until you do that. You know, sometimes you can spend like a week or you know, going, oh God, what am I doing? I should probably stop this. And then you don't want to go in the studio and you're almost avoiding it and you don't. And that's kind of a big one. I mean, there's loads of little technical things I could tell you about, like, you know, spending too much time compressing, you know, or worrying about EQs or certain things, or, you know, obsessing about, oh, I have to have this plug-in, or if I don't have this, you know, this thing. But yeah, it's just having a healthy amount of belief in yourself. But I think something that Lucy and I talked about before is being able to take criticism. Because it's quite an insular thing if you're making music on your own. And as you say, you put everything into it, and that when people kind of make comments on it, that don't take it to heart. You know, just kind of learn from what they're saying, and, you know, take everything with a pinch of salt. When someone goes, oh, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard, you know, you should be amazing, this is, you know, why aren't you, you know, don't kind of believe all that as well. You know, just take everything with a little bit of, with a little pinch of salt, and the whole ride will be a lot easier, generally.
That was a really, really good end, I think.
Okay.
We all kind of done. Yeah, I think it's quite
Right.
a nice note
Well,
to end on.
Thank you very much for all listening.
A round of applause for Bonar. Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Cheers.
And for everyone who's watched from home, thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you for MMS session 6. Thank you. Okay.
Cheers.
Thanks very
Thank
much,
you.
Bonar, that's great.
Thanks very much. Thanks for